there's nothing special we're doing. I mean, this is typical supply and demand type of economics. And when it comes to the vendors, I think one of the most important things that I do as a business person is I don't look at it as me trying to get the lowest price. I don't try to get the best deal. I kind of look to the vendor and I say, how can we work with each other?
Let's save you some money. Let's go through your income statements, fertility doctors. Let's go through your costs and see how we can save you money by eliminating, replacing, reducing, negotiating. But before we do that, I have to fess up to some technical difficulties that messed up this interview a little bit. It was my part. I know that breaks your heart. You're not going to get to hear all of my witty insights the same as you would if the recording for the audio went properly, but Dr. Amols, who was our guest, Dr. Mark Amols from New Direction Fertility in Arizona, gave us so many good insights. I was late to the interview to begin with no good excuse, just my carelessness. I didn't want to have to bring him back on for his time for the audio issues that were on my end, but my audio stopped recording about a quarter of the way into the conversation. So I re-recorded my questions. I tried to do my best to match them up with how the conversation went and the answers that Dr. Amols gave. If any of the answers seem off, blame it on me. But the insights in this episode are terrific. I asked Dr. Amols to walk us through his low-cost, affordable IVF model that he's had a lot of success with in the Phoenix area. I have him go through those things that he spends less money on, things that he doesn't spend less money on in his system for approaching that. I definitely want to have him back on for another conversation about top of license, not just the REI, but everyone in the fertility practice, going through the accountability chart and what that would look like. But today we focus mostly on materials and services. And we break those into 4 categories. The first is those materials and services that you just don't need. You can eliminate those costs altogether. The second, which ones can you reduce or replace with cheaper alternatives because you're reducing them in some way? The third is those commodities that you need them, but there's a wide range of prices and not a wide range of quality. So how do you get the cheapest? And then the fourth, maybe there is a wide range on prices, maybe there isn't, but there is a wide range on quality, and you really have to pony up sometimes. So we break into those 4 categories. We also talk about things like software and professional services. And Dr. Amols is very generous in this episode. He gives specific examples. He gives specific costs. He opens up some of his playbook very transparently, and he shares that with you. So if you talk to Dr. Amols, please tell him thank you, because I want him to come back on and share more, but I also want everyone to come on and share a little bit more. And it always pushes the envelope when somebody's willing to just share a little bit more. It makes that episode that much more popular, more valuable, and then people want to mimic that, and they tend to share more valuable information and give more of value to the audience when they come on. So enjoy this conversation with Dr. Mark Amols. Dr. Amols, Mark, welcome back to Inside Reproductive Health.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate it.
I thought to invite you back on because I was in a meeting not too long ago with an older physician who was expressing distress in their voice. I could hear how troubled this person was, that they wanted to reduce costs at their IVF center because they wanted more people in their area to be able to afford treatment. And they legitimately did not know how to do that. They're already being squeezed on the margins. I could see their numbers. It's not like they're raking in a whole bunch that, it's just coming out of a inflated top line for them. And there's been a handful of people that have been able to do a lower cost, affordable IVF model in the country, only a handful. And you're one of them. You've been on the show to talk about that before, and that's still one of the most popular episodes. And I remember at that time we did it live, and it was during the COVID shutdown, and we had more people than we had capacity for in the Zoom room. We had to upgrade our account, and so I wanted to have you back on, and I wanted to go through with you how you select your partners, meaning your strategic partners, your vendors, because a lot of people would like to be able to lower costs and they just feel like they're getting squeezed everywhere. So, how do you think about this challenge?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you told me about the topic, I was kind of confused when you said, how do I choose my vendors? But it actually does all come together. I think the question isn't so much how we do it, but why other people can't do it. There's nothing special we're doing. I mean, this is typical supply and demand type of economics. And when it comes to the vendors, I think one of the most important things that I do as a business person is I don't look at it as me trying to get the lowest price. I don't try to get the best deal. I kind of look to the vendor and I say, how can we work with each other? And so, for example, like I understand a vendor has shipping costs. So if I want them to send me something every month, I realize that's going to cost them more money. So I'll work with them and say, hey, what if I just take like 2 large shipments a year? I'll take a huge volume. You give me a lower cost. Now you're not paying shipping all the time. And you're guaranteed this amount every time I'm at Gap. And so that helps kind of like, look at it as a relationship in that standpoint. But the other thing is I understand the point of volume. So when you're talking about low cost, I mean, you think of like Target and stuff, you have to have more volume. If you don't do more volume, you're going to lose. And the way the traditional IVF is set up is really this kind of, we're going to get 10, 20 patients in per month to do IVF. And so they rely on making a lot in each sale and they don't have the volume. And so when you do have the volume, or at least if you're going to have that volume, you can go to these vendors and say, hey, here's my volume. Here's my projected volume. You can see how much we're growing each year. And I tell them, I say, listen, if you make a deal with me and help me, I will stay with you. Even if your prices go up a little bit, I'll stay with you. And so down to the vendor pick, like you were saying. So getting back down to how do I pick my vendors? It depends on your product. So there are some products that are made by multiple vendors. There are some products that are not, right? So if you think of, let's say, Fairing or Golden Left, any of the meds out there, that's like the electric company. You really don't have a choice, right? You only have a choice between Golden Left and Folliston, but when it comes to Menopur, you really don't have a choice. So for those type of companies, there's really not much you can do. The relationship is really just them being nice to you, and you still have to keep buying their product. But with Folliston and Golden Left, obviously, you can work with them to try to get better pricing for your patients. When it comes to things like products for the lab, you're a little bit limited because there are quality differences. Luckily, it's been very standardized in our industry now. So, most people are using the same products now. But with those vendors, it comes down to, I think, building some type of loyalty with them. So, if you work with a company every single time, they know you're going to come in and buy, 6 ultrasound machines, 20 incubators at the same time. They're going to, keep giving you better prices through the years because they know you're going to stay with them. And again, building that relationship with them, I'm always sending stuff their way. And then the other vendors are going to be your vendors that have multiple vendors that do the same thing. So when you talk about things like speculums, or you talk about things like drapes, you can get drapes from multiple companies. There's stuff I buy off of Amazon because it's cheaper for me to get them off of Amazon than it is through my suppliers. So like Henry Schein, they have Tegaderm, which goes on the skin after you put an IV in. If I buy from them, it's like $100 for 100 of them, or $80. I can get off of Amazon for $15. The exact same things. So when it comes back to choosing the vendors, going back to that question of how do we make it work? So one of the things is I try to find those strategic partners, and I talk to them like they're a business. I don't talk to them like I'm trying to buy their product. I talk to them and say, listen, how can we both help each other? What do you need me to buy? How much of you need me to do? Because like there's things I want at a lower price, and I'll go to a company and say, I need this at a lower price. And I said, I can't go any lower. I said, okay, but if you buy more of this, then it'll offset, I can lower that price. And so again, it still ends up the same, right? We're still looking at the same thing, which is overhead, which is your expense, versus what you make. And that's really all it is. It's just the difference is it's harder to do. So I'm not trying to say anything about most doctors. Most doctors don't want to do business. I mean, why would you? That's not why you became a doctor. You want to go out and just make money. And so for most people, they see money in their bank account, they're happy. They're like, hey, it's going up. I'm happy. I see the numbers going up. But that doesn't mean they're efficient. That doesn't mean that they've actually at the point that they're getting the most amount of money to make. I could almost guarantee you that if they went and got a person like, Scott Robinson, from Practice Up, they got him to go through their practice, I guarantee you they'll make more money just by him going through and finding out where they're wasting tons of money. And so in those situations where you have those practices that already have this high overhead, they're trying then to do this low cost model, but they're not efficient. And that's really the main thing, is you have to be efficient. There's more to it. We'll go over that in a little bit more detail, but that's really the biggest thing. And so when you're looking at vendors, you're trying to make sure that, you pick vendors that you can build that relationship with, so you can get lower prices and be able to offer things, at fair cost. So things like speculums, my speculums cost, I think, something like 10 cents. Whereas like when I was at the other clinic, it was $1.50 per speculum, and it wasn't needed. And so again, there's things you can do to get better pricing. That doesn't matter. No one's going to have a bad IVF cycle because their speculum isn't great, but they are going to have a bad IVF cycle if their incubator is bad.
So I do want to go through those different categories of what's more interchangeable versus what you think is less interchangeable. And I want to break up those different categories. First, I want to think about, how do you approach looking at this systematically? Or do you just start to negotiate and look for different options when you're ordering something? Do you go through your P&L at different points of the year and go line by line and say, how can I start with this, and go all the way down the spreadsheet? How do you approach it?
Yeah. Every 3 months, I go through and I look at everything that we order, and I find out if it's one of those categories of where we can't change, right? There's no option. It is something that we can change, but we have very little room, because it might be something like, it's an incubator. I'm like, I can't go for the crappy incubator. Or is it something that's easily exchangeable, like a drape or something like that? And then what I do is I always go through and look for the best price. And so, for example, like propofol is one of the drugs we use for anesthesia. I found a way for us to get propofol at 20% the cost we were originally paying. And again, it doesn't sound like a big deal, because most clinics, if you're only doing 10, 20 cycles a month, you're not going to notice a couple dollars here and there. But when you start doing 100 something a month, now all of a sudden that becomes several $100s every month in that one product. And so those little differences make a big difference. And so, I go through every 3 months. I look at things. I'm always looking for, ways to reduce costs. Here's an example. So one way we reduced our cost for bloods by 50%, so we made more margins, was I noticed we were buying 10 milliliter tubes to fill the bloods up. And then one day I was wondering, do they make smaller tubes that cost less? And we went and found that they make like 4 milliliter or 5 milliliter tubes. And so we went and got 5 milliliter. And then later we found they even made a smaller tube. We only run like 6 tests at our clinic. So we realized we could use less blood. It cost half the amount, and we reduced our cost overhead for those supplies by 50%. So just things like that, looking for things, looking at what do you need and what are you getting? And you may not need what you're getting.
I would love to have you back on for another topic to talk about top of license throughout the accountability chart. So you and I can go through the accountability chart of a fertility center together, because we often think of top of license as just the REI, but the whole purpose of getting someone to practice at the top of their license is to get the next person to practice at the top of theirs, down to the person that is checking someone in and bringing someone to their room.
Yeah, so it's a culture, right? So as a culture, as a clinic, we all believe in the same thing, which is making this affordable. So everybody knows that the better our overhead is, the lower we can keep costs for patients. And so my lab, will always look for the best price. And sometimes they'll come to me and say, this is all we can do. And I say, okay, let me look at it. And I might look into it a little bit more. I happen to be very nerdy. I love numbers. I'm like a data nerd, so I love that stuff. So I enjoy doing it. But I have other people who will do a lot of that for me, and then when they can't, they'll come to me. But I'm always thinking of ways we can reduce costs, just because our field, I do believe, has a lot of fluff and a lot of overhead that's not needed. We made some big changes just recently on just even staffing, a way I thought out of the box of way of staffing our clinic different, where, medical assistants are very difficult now to find. And, I kind of looked into the legality of like, do we really need medical assistants for every little thing? And so we found out that we could even just put greeters out there who can help us just, put patients in rooms. And then again, that brought costs down. So it's not resting on your laurels and just saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. It's always going to be this way. We're always changing and adjusting. Same thing with vendors, always looking at different things. Now, there's the point where, again, once you have that relationship, if you're constantly just changing for the lowest price, well, then no one's ever going to work with you. So, I mean, there's a little bit of a flexibility you have to have, right? So if someone's giving me a great price now, and then 2 years later, they have to go up a little bit, and they're a little bit more than the next one, I'll still stay with them because at that point, I know I've built that relationship. And again, and I'll talk to them and just say, hey, it's a little higher than we need. Is there anything we could do to get that down? Can we purchase more at one time? Can we, and stuff like that. But things like, those little things like shipping, all those different things, working with your vendor, you can get better pricing by just working with them and ordering more and committing to more.
For the sake of this topic, let's break it into 4 categories: those costs which you can cut, eliminate entirely; those which you can reduce significantly, either by replacing them with something else or reducing them by a lot; third, that which is a commodity, you need them, but you can find a wide range of prices for not a wide range of quality; and that fourth category, those things that really matter. There might be a wide range of prices, but there might not be. And there certainly is a wide range of quality, and it's too significant.
Exactly.
What are those costs that fall into the first category that you can eliminate entirely?
One of the things when I was in other clinics, obviously did this with birth and training, and then in prior business I was with, is there was a lot of stuff we did to make like a few dollars, but wasted a lot of our time. I think the thing that's most important to understand is there's only so much time in the day, right? As a physician, I only have so much time. I'm probably, when you think about when it comes to resources, the most scarce resource in the clinic. And so what happens is that there was a lot of stuff I was doing as a physician that made absolutely no sense. So we used to do what were called IVF consults, where we would sit there and go over the whole process with the patient of the IVF. We used to even do a surgical visit the day before to make an extra dollar or two, through the insurance. The problem is that same hour and a half being used for retrievals, could do 3 retrievals, or I could do 2 consults. And so one of the things that can be thrown away is really using people who can do things in their category. So for example, there are things no one else can do that I can do, right? As a fertility doctor. And so those are under my license. Any nurse can do those things I was doing before those other clinics. And I can guarantee you there are clinics out there today where the physician is still doing a ton of this stuff. And there's no reason to do that. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of your time. You'll never be able to do this low cost model because you're looking at going, I got to spend all these different appointments, 8 appointments before I get to this point. No, you don't. You have a team that can do this stuff. And so part of what's important is you want to utilize people to the max they can be, what's the most they're allowed to do as a nurse. And then, but you also don't want to waste their time doing things that you don't need to, right? Because you're paying them too much. So when you look at overhead, so when you talk about what can you get rid of, it's more not getting rid of it, but adjusting it to out of the wrong hands. Instead of the doctor, bring it to the nurse, bring it to, maybe you have a specialist. That's all they do. You just bring in someone, let's say off the street, you pay them $16 an hour and you're like, you teach them everything about IVF. You say, this now is our IVF consultant. And they're just going to tell them about IVF. And you know what? They're going to be pretty damn good at that job. You don't have to pay someone $80,000 a year as a nurse to do this every day when someone else can do it and they'll do just as good because that's what they're specialized at. That's kind of the way I look at things when you're looking at these models. I think one thing that's really interesting, though, about our clinic versus some of the others is that I think it's really important, though, to stay a high-quality clinic. I'm not saying other clinics are bad. I won't name a clinic, but there are a lot of people who do what I do and have very poor pregnancy rates. And there are clinics like me who have very good pregnancy rates. And I think that's really important in this big thing. So when you're doing all these things, you're making these adjustments, you don't lose being a good clinic. It's not about just getting low cost and having bad service. You have to still have good service. So all these things I'm saying, when I take them out, it's not that they're just not important. Like I said, so one of the fluffs I always talk about is like, most people don't want to sit there for an hour and hear about IVF. Like, they'd rather read it on paper or, give it to them in a text or something like that. So just stuff like that is how I've taken those things out. Product-wise, it's more just choice. Some physicians like using iodine. You don't really need iodine. I mean, there are other changes you can do, but those are very small.
How about the second category, that which you can reduce quite a bit or swap it out for a much less expensive alternative?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things. I know it sounds crazy, but like going from 4x4s to 2x2s for certain things. We just did it a way. We always did it one way. needles. When I'll give you an example. One thing that a lot of clinics use is they use butterfly needles. Butterfly needles are really expensive. I mean, the best price you're ever going to get for them is maybe $1, but usually they're like $1.50, $2. You go to a regular needle, I mean, they're pennies. And so, when you think about it, if you're doing 1,000 or 2,000 needle sticks, every few months, that's thousands of dollars versus a couple $100. So that's something where, we still have those if needed, but any phlebotomist who knows what they're doing does not need to use a butterfly, but yet clinics use them. You can get skinny needles that are still butterflies. So another example too was not only going from the 5 milliliter tubes was a big difference, but we actually found out that there are other brands of the tubes. And so a lot of people, when they use like Tiger Top tubes, most expensive from, Beckman, but you can actually get these ones we call them McDonald tubes because they look like a McDonald franchise tube. And those are, when I say lower cost, like 1/10 the cost of the other tubes. And so again, something as simple as that can save a ton of money.
And how about that third category? Those things that you definitely need, but they're commodities. You can find them from a number of different vendors for a wide range of prices. How do you find the best price for those?
I think one is obviously you have to have a company where you can keep looking. You have to look at see if they have multiple companies that sell that product. Now here's an example of drapes, the pads that the patients sit on. So we were buying a certain size, but they were kind of too big. And I found if I just get a size that was like 2 inches smaller, we save like half the amount. There's just like little things like that. Always asking the question of, do we need that? We obviously need the purpose of protecting the patient so their butt's not sitting on the drape. But if it's falling over the sides, well, you can wear one that's 2 inches smaller, and now you save half the amount. Like little things like that we look at. One was Mayo stands. We used to use Mayo stands all the time. So when you do surgery, there's a thing called Mayo stand. You put a sterile drape over, and then that way it protects anything on it, which you obviously want to have is sterile. But then one day I was wondering, why are we putting a Mayo stand and then we put a sterile thing on top of it already when we open up the instrument? So instead what we did is we took our instruments, bought a slightly bigger, kind of like the drape that we cleaned it with, put it on there, we open it up, and now that becomes kind of our sterile drape. And we still have the same benefit as if we were paying the Mayo stand, but we're paying a fraction of the cost. And again, we're not losing any sterility. Everything's still the same. It's that we just use the drape that it came with, that we have everything cleaned in as the sterile area. Trying to think of other things where we've made some changes too. Sorry, there's a lot of things. I mean, but those are kind of some of the big examples of things where we just look at everything up. Here's another one. I just thought one was probe covers. So when you buy probe covers, if you buy them in bulk, you get a huge difference in cost. So if you just buy like the 100 pack every time, you pay a premium. But you can buy like thousands of them in bulk, and they're clean. And then that way you just put those into your rooms, and then you use those. So again, another place you can save a lot of money. I think the big question for speculums is you have to ask what your volume is. So if you're only doing, let's say, 5 a day, you're probably going to save more money than using something like a reusable one and just clean them. But that takes money cleaning those. It takes a person cleaning them. In a busy clinic like mine, that could never happen. You have to use disposable. And like if you use the common disposable, you'll pay a lot of money. So here's one I'll give away. This is a good one people will really like. So if you buy Welch Allen lighted speculums, they're very expensive. The light that goes in them are very expensive. Everyone loses those all the time. It drives me nuts when my nurses lose them because they're like $300 for those lights. The speculums themselves cost about $5 each speculum. So Henry Schein makes another version of it, but the problem is it's a wired version. So the problem is you have to put a wire into it, which is horrible. You want to have it portable. So there's a company that actually makes a little light that fits into the Henry Schein one I figured out. And so we were able to buy all the lower cost Henry Schein lighted speculums and use the disposable light. So the best part about it is that if anyone loses a light, it was just $10 on that light. And the second thing is we reduced the cost by half of our speculums. Just another thing I found by researching things. So It's not always just the supplies you use, but also the time committed to it. So, for example, like a sonohistogram, the way most clinics I've seen do it, they buy saline bottles, they pull the saline up into a 10 cc syringe, and then they go and they do their sonohistogram pushing with the saline. When we used to do it that way, we had to do sonohistograms about every 15 minutes. And then I found pre-filled syringes, and I thought, well, they're more expensive. We're going to pay more. But then when I took the time into it and said, how fast can I do it using everything pre-filled, we ended up doing them every 8 minutes. And so, again, one of the things that you also look at is not just the cost of them, but you're also looking at, does it make it more efficient? And so we switched over now completely to pre-filled salines. And back to that thing where I said about the 10 cc's. So we were just buying 10 cc's for everyone. And then I went and spoke to the nurses. I said, well, how much do you use? And they go, oh, we only use about 3 or 5. So then I went and looked up and found out, do they make 3 or 5 milliliter ones? And are those lower cost? And they were. So at that point, I said, okay, I'll buy the lower cost ones. And the same thing with like propofol. Even when I got the better price, one of the things I found out was sometimes when they're giving propofol, they'd open up a whole other bottle for just a tiny bit. I thought, well, why don't they make really tiny bottles? So that way we don't have to waste so much medicine. And they did. And so we bought those. And so then the anesthesiologist, they just need a little bit more, use a smaller bottle, which costs less. And so it's not always just about getting a different product, but finding out, are these little areas that you're not using so much, and stuff like that is really how you do it. Even Omnipig, which you do HSGs for, there's several bottles, and you'll find that there's one bottle that's about a third the cost. So back to that fourth category. Yeah, again, I think it depends on how you look at your clinic, and that's why I made that point. I think one of the biggest differences in our clinic, we have to have high quality. I feel like, what good does it do to have it lower cost if you're just going to have bad rates? And so the things that I feel like you can't come away from are some of the main products. Good incubators. You really have to be up to date on your incubators. I think there is some adjustments you can make between them, but I feel like, sure, you can get a cheap hair cell incubator, but it's not going to be the same quality as a benchtop incubator. Same thing with things like gases. I would love to be able to use cheap gas, but you're not able to. If we're using mixed gases, we have to have it certified. Now, we did find another company to get lower costs again, so we always are working on that, and we're even looking at now mixing our own gas to save money. But the point is, you really can't do much. Now there is like I said, when it comes to medicines, stuff like that, you can't change that. There's nothing you can do with the company. But when it comes to things like incubators, we look at a lot of things. We buy a lot of them, so we're able to get good deals. But there's really not a lot of, like I said, adjustment. I mean, other than when you want to be one of the top, you have to use some of the top stuff.
What about other costs, particularly related to your tech stack? Things like your EMR, your payroll software, other software, your billing and scheduling software.
So when it came to EMRs, I feel they all suck. I don't think there's a good one. If anyone says they have a good one, I want to know about it, but I don't believe there are any good ones. So when I looked at that, I said, well, listen, there's no good ones. I'm just going to go with something that gives me the fastest speed. So we went with a system called Dr. Chrono. And what's unique about it is you can do the whole thing on an iPad. And it's very fast. It's not made for fertility. We're actually trying to make a component for fertility. But so we went with that, but it's free. Doesn't cost me anything. So my EMR costs nothing. They do my billing for me as well, and take the same fraction amount that we take it from any other biller. So we just use a company. Sometimes there's some things that are cheaper to do when you outsource it until your volume gets high enough. So obviously, like a big company like a Pinnacle or CCRM, right? They're gonna have their own HR and stuff. But for smaller places, it's actually cheaper to just find a company that will do it than hiring someone to do it. So we do all that outside.
How do you approach paying for professional services, things like business consulting, marketing consulting, accounting, financial consulting, legal expertise? How do you pay for professional services or think about costs like associated for those?
So because I like the business side, I do a lot of it myself. Obviously, I only have so much time in the day. I do have a CPA. So my CPA does all my bookkeeping, does that. We do have a legal firm that we work with all the time if needed. Luckily, we don't have to use them a lot, except for all the expansion we're doing right now into the other cities. When it comes to financial stuff, like I said, I do a lot of that myself. We don't do much for marketing. Luckily, we're very fortunate enough that we don't have to, but I do my own marketing when it comes to things like Facebook, my podcast, and things like that.
My recommendation for professional services is to separate them into sporadic engagements whenever possible. So sometimes you need professional services for execution, some marketing services, some things that you might need for legal help in terms of drafting documents that are pretty easy to do here and there. Just the drafting part of it, I'm talking about things that you might need accounting services like bookkeeping, those ongoing things. Try to minimize those costs as inexpensive as you can, and then be willing to pay for professional services at a high hourly rate. That's something that I do now. I charge at a higher hourly rate, and I could do packages and things, but that allows people to engage us at a rate that works for us because they're paying high by the hour, but also works for them because they don't have to lock it in every month. So go ahead, pay for expensive business consultants, expensive legal consultants, but try to separate that from the ongoing costs of monthly implementation when possible.
Recurring costs are one things that can kill a company. And so, you're hitting right on that. And you're right. Things like consultations, you don't need recurring forever, but it's worth getting the best when you do it. And usually that does cost more. Now that we're doing all this expansion, we use lawyers more. And so we've even looked at potentially having an in-house lawyer. But again, recurring costs get expensive. And so I agree with you 100% on that.
You're still independently owned. I sometimes see independently owned fertility practices having more leverage because of consolidation, because there are fewer people to buy services. There is more emphasis on those buyers that remain. And so even if you're not the size of the networks, as an independently owned fertility center, do you have more leverage because everyone else has consolidated and people have to make deals with those that remain? Or am I fantasizing too much about this?
I think it again comes back to that, supply demand thing, right? So if you have a clinic that's not using a lot, I don't know if they're going to be able to really get best prices and things like that. I think clinics that do more, I'll give an example like CMY. CMY is humongous, right? They do something like 4,000 retrievals a year. They're able to get the best pricing, just as big as like a Pinnacle or CCRM. And so I think I would tell someone if they were trying to do what I'm doing, is I think the most important part is explain to them, show them your growth, right? If you can show growth every year and say, listen, we're growing, planning on expanding, then you become kind of your own group, purchasing group. And you say, listen, every clinic I open up, I'm going to still order from you. And that helps it. One of the things that I think you and I spoke about one time is, why not all the little guys team together and make one group, and then that way we'll be our own purchasing group. I think it's a little bit fantasizing. I think as a company, if I was a company and someone was solo and they were doing a lot, I wouldn't give them lower prices, because that's the only reason you're giving the lower prices to the bigger companies is because of the volume they're doing. And it just wouldn't make financial sense to give it to someone who's using very.
You've given us really specific examples. You've also given us a framework for practice owners to go through their own books and see how they can lower costs, how they can increase profit for themselves, and ideally pass on a lot of those savings to patients. How would you like to conclude?
If anyone's ever interested in learning about this, I don't try to hide any of this. I would love for everyone to make fertility more affordable. And I think there's always going to be those niche offices that offers, that one-on-one the whole time process with a doctor, and those are going to do great. But if anyone's ever interested, I'm more than happy to talk to them. If they want some of the ideas I have to reduce money costs, on their overhead, more than happy to talk to them about it. But yeah, hopefully I was able to help some people.
Dr. Mark Amols, owner of New Direction Fertility in Arizona, thank you very much for coming on Inside Reproductive Health, and I look forward to having you back on for another topic very soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
You've been listening to the Inside Reproductive Health podcast with Griffin Jones. If you are ready to take action to make sure that your practice thrives beyond the revolutionary changes that are happening in our field and in society, visit fertilitybridge.com to begin the first piece of the fertility marketing system, the goal and competitive diagnostic. Thank you for listening to Inside Reproductive Health.